Welcome on to yet another edition of the Fast to Beyond 50 podcast. It's great to have you with us. And today we are digging into the science behind running fast at a low heart rate. I've got the coach, Lindsey Parry, with me. My name is Brad Nadalts. Linz, great to catch up again. And this is a subject that is one of the cornerstones of Coach Parry as a coaching business. And we're talking heart rate and everything around heart rate, particularly if you do want to run faster and making sure that we're doing things right from a heart rate perspective. Before we start diving deep on this one, how's your training for Berlin going? It's hopefully still ticking along quite nicely.
Yeah, very well, thanks, Brad. I still feel like my ability has deteriorated to the point where I don't think I can do what I want to do, which is run under 3 hours. But at least I'm thriving and feeling good and enjoying the training, and that's cool. That's just I just got to embrace these things and make sure I stay healthy, look after myself, and more important, that I practice what I preach.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, no pressure. The world is not watching to make sure you go under 3 hours at Berlin, but yeah, just wanted to put it out there. Cool. Let's chat a little bit about what we wanted to talk about today, and that is sort of really digging into the science that underlies this running fast at a low heart rate. Let's just take a step back before we actually get into the details. Linz, where did your interest as a coach sort of? How did you end up in this space with regards to where one of the big philosophies within Coach Parry is heart rate and making sure you're running at the right heart rates for endurance training and for endurance athletes?
So look, it started at university, and it literally started with me understanding how the human body works, where we get our energy from, how we produce it, and then coupling that to this repetitive cycle of injury that I was in personally as a student running. I don't even want to know how many times I tore my calf muscle when I was training at university. And then those two things came together where I met a friend who was just starting running. And I was like, hey, man, I'm so tired of trying to run fast because it just hurts me. And I love running. So let me just take you under my wing, and I'll run with you. I'll help you build up. What do you want to do? What are your running interests? And then that was kind of the start of that journey where I started helping this one guy. So I started coaching there in our running club. I started reading lots of Runner's World magazines at the time. Um, Plus, coupled with that, the fact that I was studying as part of my degree, I did anatomy and physiology 1 and 2. So took it up to a second year level. And then as part of my human movement studies, we did anatomy and physiology all the way through to postgraduate studies. So that's kind of where it came from, the marrying of the practical from the Runner's World stuff, the learning the physiology and how the body actually functions, and then actually physically seeing it in practice with myself. I realized that I still needed the other elements, and I think this is the part that's the hardest for us to convey to people, because they go, "Oh, these guys that only do zone 2." No, we don't only do zone 2 training, but we know that's the part of training that everybody does wrong.
Mm.
So that's why we emphasize it so hard, is because that's the part people are doing wrong. And it's the part, I want to say it's the most important, but that's not. They're all equally important. But if you don't, it's the one that everyone does wrong. And if they got it right, their running would improve so much. So that's really it in a nutshell, where it came from and why why I labor the point so much about running easy enough on easy days, so that we can build the engine to sustain the hard running, and so that we can be in a position to run hard enough when you are called to action.
Linz, what makes low heart rate training so valuable? And I mean, you've mentioned it like it's so important, but particularly for runners in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond.
So I'm going to quickly take half a step back and go, heart rate training is great, but it's very important to stress again. We must know that what we are measuring is reliable. Okay. I don't use the word accurate because that's less important than a reliable reading. So if we are measuring the same thing reliably over and over, then we can do a test of sorts on the individual. And I know we're going to jump into heart age based and all that later, so I don't want to go there yet, but we can then set reliable, repeatable values for you as an individual. That normally means using chest strap. Okay, so that's the bottom line. That is generally accepted, that it needs to be chest strap, and then it's both accurate and reliable enough for exactly what we need. Okay, so now to answer your question, why heart rate? Because heart rate is just such a great reflection of what is happening to us right now. It takes into account our current state: tired, anxious, stressed, um, if you've just had caffeine, whatever is happening, it takes into account the organism as we are right now. And then once we start exercising, it becomes very reflective of that session that we are doing, coupled with where we are right now. And when we combine those two things together, it becomes a really good tool to keep you running easy enough to protect yourself, but also, and this is important, running hard enough that we elicit the physiological response that we are looking for when we are running easy.
Liz, can you explain the connection between heart rate and fuel efficiency in simple terms, in layman terms?
Yeah, so in very layman terms, efficiency is our ability to do two things: to pull oxygen out of the atmosphere and send it down to the muscles, okay, as well as for us to make use of the fuel that's in our body in the presence of oxygen. Okay, so those are the two things that are the most important in terms of efficiency for any exercise that lasts beyond 3 minutes, really. So those are the two processes. Now, the things that we need to improve to make those two now oversimplified concepts possible are we need to improve our body's ability to extract the oxygen. Okay, so that happens in the lungs, down at the bottom of the lungs, where we've got little sacs. I'm gonna stay away from terminology, Brad. I'm going to use language that everyone can understand. We've got little sacs there that are bathed in fluid, and the blood runs past those sacs and picks up that oxygen. Okay. Now, the way that the blood picks up that oxygen is that we've got red blood cells. Now, oxygen can bind or join or catch a lift. Okay, we're going to stay as far away from terminology as possible. The oxygen can catch a lift down to the muscles, and when we get to the muscles, we've got the blood vessels split up into smaller and smaller tributaries, and those tributaries bathe the muscle, and so that's the oxygen will jump off where it's needed at the sites of those muscles. Inside the muscles themselves, we've also got stores of sugar, okay, carbohydrates, but it's sugar, and the body can use that, but it can't actually make tons of energy per molecule of sugar, but it can do it in the presence of oxygen. So it uses a bit of sugar, but more important, it'll send out signals. It'll be like, hey guys, party happening at 30 Blossom Avenue. And then the body gets involved there. Oxygen's going there, fat. Now also fat jumps into the bloodstream and goes, I need an Uber to 30 Blossom Avenue, and it goes down to the working muscles. Now, the body can make large amounts of energy breaking down fat in the presence of oxygen. But now, how do we get more Uber drivers, the red blood cells? How do we get more Uber drivers into circulation? Well, through exercise, the body starts to produce more. So that's the one thing. So we hire more Uber drivers. So now it's rush hour. There's lots of Uber drivers that are cruising around. That's the first thing. The second thing, we jack up the speed limits. Okay, so we go, hang on, guys, we need bigger highways. So those blood vessels get bigger. Okay, so now the body's going, right, guys, bigger blood vessels. We can fit more Uber drivers per second through here. We're going to increase the speed limit, and then the heart gets stronger. So the heart can actually now pump, because the heart is the petrol for the blood. Okay, so the heart can now pump harder, it can fill up with more blood, pump harder. And so we now have improved our ability to take oxygen out of the air because we've got more red blood cells swirling around. We can also bring more of the party guys, the fat cells. We can bring more fat cells down to the working muscles so that we can make more energy for your muscles to contract, and of course the heart is beating better. So that's how we do it. And then the final process is that energy needs to be made in a factory. Okay, so we've got all these little coal stations down in the muscle that take the fat, take the carbohydrate, take the oxygen, and they make energy. Now, in response to training, the body makes more of these coal factories, mitochondria. So that's then the muscles are able to do more work because they've got more access to readily available energy. And I'm not going to go into the reverse process, but of course it's a factory, so it makes pollution, and we need to get that pollution out of the body. But all of those same improvements are happening so that we can, and then of course we can get much more complicated because there's not just fats, there's also pyruvate in the liver, and there's byproducts of energy metabolism that we can send back into the energy cycle. But in very basic terms, you've got what you need to understand what we're trying to improve from an energy supply point of view.
I love that analogy. And I think it leads really nicely into my next question, because you were talking about getting those blood vessels wider so you can get more Uber drivers through there faster. And you would think that in order to do that is just running fast. Like, you've got to improve those systems by pushing hard. And that's what I wanted to ask you. How does running slower or easier actually help us run faster in the long run?
So, so it's a really good question, because if we put this all onto a continuum, and this is a huge mistake that most people make when they are trying to learn about how we produce and supply energy, okay? Because a lot of people think that when we click over into anaerobic metabolism, what does that mean? That means that we are making energy without oxygen. So the body can also do that, okay? But it is less efficient, it drives up fatigue, it drives up acidosis in the muscles, and it brings about the termination of exercise earlier. But the mistake people make is that they think that when we get to that point, that the body stops making or providing energy through oxygen. That's not the case. What happens here is that the anaerobic will supplement. And in fact, to some degree, there's always a small amount of anaerobic that's happening anyway. But the point here really is that when we get up to this point where we're at very high, we are at the maximum for oxidative energy metabolism. So the mistake that people make is that they think that if that's the maximum and we train at the maximum a lot, we are going to really stimulate that system, and then we're going to get a whole lot fitter. Okay. Now, the problem is there might be some truth in that. However, if we train there too often, what actually happens is that we become a little bit better at anaerobic, and we get a little bit worse So there might be a fine line where you could maximize oxidative, but it's so close to the anaerobic that what actually happens is that we strengthen anaerobic and we weaken the aerobic. And this is the most important part of all of it, and training there is just not sustainable. Okay, we cannot do large volumes of training at that intensity without breaking down, getting sick, being tired all the time, hating life, being sore, stiff, just never being able to recover, can't look forward to training. Yeah, so that there's a very practical reason why we also can't spend too much time training up against that line. And every couple of years we get the junk miles are bad. Like, use your time, maximize your time. We've analyzed Olympians
No
from
pain, no
the
gain. Yeah.
we've the Olympians have been from the 80s all the way through to now, and there's a reason why they all train like this. It's because for performance, and we must be very clear here, for performance, there isn't a better way to train. For performance, we need to do the bulk of our training, zone 2, and then some of our training at much higher intensities. And the volume and frequency of those are determined by how much we do of the zone 2.
Mm.
So if you're doing tons of zone 2, you can do more, not proportionally. So proportionally, we do the same.
Yeah, because
But our volume of it is more.
I think you make such a good point there. And often I think people fall into this trap. They look at elite athletes, so professional athletes, and they go, you know what, these guys and girls are doing like 2, 3, maybe 4 high intensity sessions a week. But they don't actually realize that they're actually doing, as you say, proportionally a huge amount of zone 2 or like that. So they've got this massive base. And often people fall into the trap and go, well, they are doing 4. I've limited time, so I'm going to try and push a few more higher intensity sessions in there because I don't have the extra time. And that's the point. Like if you're talking 80-20, obviously 80% of your stuff super easy, 20% higher intensity. If you don't have lots of time, it still needs to be 80-20. Like that is the
From
point. And
from a performance point of view, absolutely. So from a pure health point of view, there is an argument to be made for getting the most out of a workout from a calorific expenditure point of view, and just making sure we spread those workouts far enough apart so that they're sustainable and we don't hurt ourselves. There's an argument that can be made for health, but there is no argument that can be made for performance.
yeah.
If you've got limited time to train, you still have to train the right way to get the best out of your circumstance.
Yeah, because that was leading me into the point that I wanted to make, especially for runners over 50, is the risk of injury when, as you mentioned, when you're doing those higher intensity sessions is jacked up if you're doing more of them than you should be doing in a week, and especially as we get older because the need for recovery. So running your easy runs easy enough allows you to limit that injury risk because there's not as much stress on the chassis, essentially.
Absolutely. Look, and I've seen a couple of apps at the moment out there that are two hard runs a week, and then for marathon training in particular, 2 hard plus some marathon pace session on the weekend, which is wild. And yeah, I think on a generic plan in particular, that's just crazy because you've got no way of helping that individual figure out when they need to pull back and not hurt themselves. And again, your point's 100% valid. Like if you are running 100 miles a week, 160 kilometers a week, yeah, then you can have 3 hard workouts because your workouts are probably going to total around 30 to 40 kilometers of mixed intensity running. That's a lot. But if you are running 40 to 60 Ks a week, suddenly you're doing like 15 to 20 maximum. And that starts to become difficult to then find in your 2-3 times in a week. You're going to be doing more than that.
Yeah, Lindsay, it's so funny you talk about like apps. I'm not going to mention any names, but I jumped on one of our competitor apps in the last week and a half. I'm training for the Cape Town Marathon. I wanted to just compare what we were doing to what they were doing. And I can tell you now, I wouldn't make it out of the first 2 weeks of training for that exact reason. I'm a bigger runner. They don't, I mean, none of those questions popped up in the sort of initial onboarding, and got me doing 2 interval sessions a week, and as you said, marathon race pace long runs. I would not make it out of week 2. I would be injured. So there's no ways. I mean, it looks nice. It's a sexy app, but sheesh, I tell you, from a training principles perspective, I definitely wouldn't. I wouldn't be using it long term. That is for sure. Let's talk about the age related. I mean, you mentioned it earlier on as well. Why you don't? Let's dig into why you don't recommend age sort of based heart rate formulas when it comes to this sort of training. If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury-free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsey and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K, and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now, or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, so as we get older in particular, those numbers just become less and less accurate, reliable. So if we take me as an example, I haven't stopped running from the age of 5. And so I am going to have a much higher maximum heart rate than most of my peers. That's just that is the reality. The body is really good on the use it or use it principle. So similarly, someone who's my age who hasn't done any exercise for 30 years is probably going to be quite low on that age-related formula. And someone who's been reasonably active, maybe they've got a better, maybe it predicts a little bit closer. But the point is that the age-related just doesn't work as we get older. And so we do want to have an idea of either our threshold or our maximum. Now, for obvious reasons, as we work with older populations, we don't really love to send people out to test for maximum heart rate. But fortunately, Parkrun has made it possible that in most countries in the world, I can send someone out on a hard 5K and then just get a fairly good idea around threshold. Now, the beauty of physiology, and I already alluded to it in my very beginning, and that is that physiology is not a black and a white line. Like one process doesn't happen in the absence of another process. So it's quite fluid, and it happens across what we call these transitional thresholds. So threshold heart rate, what does that mean? Well, there's in again now a little bit sciencey, but in theory, we've got 2 transitional thresholds where we kind of move from almost basic metabolic to into where we start to do producing more energy from oxygen pathways. That's your first threshold. And then we move into that second transitional threshold where we really start to do more and more contribution from anaerobic pathways. Okay. Now that whole block, which can be over about 3 minutes per kilometer. So it can be as slow for me as an individual, it can be as slow as 8 minutes a K, all the way up to about, I reckon I'm about 410, maybe just under full threshold. But let's call it, that's, you can see. So I've got 4 minutes plus minus to play with where I get zone 2 stimulus, which is what I want. Okay. And so really what I'm saying there is that if I'm out, so if my actual threshold is 4 minutes a K, not 4.5 a K, or if it's actually 4:15 a K, not not 4:05 a K. Those couple of seconds don't make a big difference because I don't want to be too close to that number. I don't want to be all the way down at 8 either, because again, that it's a transitional threshold. It's gray. So at like 7 or 8 minutes per K, I might be too low for me to really get the stimulus that I want. But basically anywhere between around 6 minutes a K and 5.5 minutes, even 4:55, 4:45. So, although and this we'll jump into part 2 of this, why I'm a bit iffy about 4:45, but basically anywhere from about 5, let's say anywhere from 5 to 6:15, I'm getting really good aerobic adaptation. Okay. I'm getting really good aerobic adaptation between 5 and 4:32, but somewhere between 5 and 4:30, I'm starting to really jack up the pounding on my body. And I'm pushing it from like a good amount of resistance for my muscles, tendons, and ligaments into a place where I'm actually starting to do some damage and extending the recovery time that I need after each one of those sessions. Okay. Now, when people are talking about junk miles, that's exactly what they're talking about. They're talking about that no man's land where you are not close enough to anaerobic to get a proper anaerobic stimulus, but you are close enough that you're hurting yourself. Even if it feels good, it feels like you're getting fit, it feels like that's the place where you're actually hurting yourself and working against your body's ability to do enough volume to get the true benefits of the zone 2. And you're also making yourself too tired to do the anaerobic and higher sessions that you want to do, and increasing your injury risk.
Linz, I'm going to take just a slight step back here as well, because some of the pushback that we get when you talk about doing those 5K threshold tests, essentially like a park run, is some people who are either starting out or are coming back from injury, or have taken a massive break that they haven't been training, say that there's no ways that I can go out and run a 5K hard now. There's just like you are smoking something. How do you determine the right sort of pace to then start out at if you aren't able to go and run a 5K? And I'm guessing the truth is like you might that's the point, is like if you can't do a 5K, you do it at the best of your ability where you are now, or is there a way to figure it out if you can't actually go and complete a 5K?
No, to be honest, for like proper beginners or people that are returning from a really long-term injury, you can do zone 2 at your previous level. Just be conservative. So if your previous zone 2 was 125 to 135 heart rate, go 125 to 130. It's going to feel ridiculously easy. And in fact, it's going to be much slower than you're accustomed to running at, but it's not a bad place to start. I'm also a fairly big fan of using Dr. Phil Maffetone's formula. Even though it is an age-rated formula, the point of it is just to make sure that you are nowhere near threshold. So that's why it works. However, and I asterisk that, is that what we have found with runners over 50 and particularly runners over 60s is that he uses a 180 minus age to set your upper limit. We use a 190 minus age. So the principle is the same. It's taken from him. I'm not going to claim it as a new Coach Parry principle just because I've added 10 onto the number. Just through experience, what we have found is with older runners, you add 10 to get to that minimum effective dose. And so the reason why we use it and why I believe it works well is because it's a hell of a conservative method. Okay. And so when you're starting out, that's absolutely fine. Then you can run, Brad, for 6 to 8 weeks. And after 6 to 8 weeks of running, even if it was too slow, that's okay. because now you will have prepped your body that you can go out and push yourself for a 5K, and then we can get a better number for you.
Right, Lindsey. So besides heart rate monitors and tracking that way, I mean, some people are still old school, they use the old Casio stopwatch. Are there any other sort of tools or ways to do this without using heart rate technology?
Look, the best tool you've got is how do I feel? I mean, it's the simplest tool you've got. Problem is we can't trust everyone's tool. So this kind of rating of perceived exertion or how do I feel, rating your exercise difficulty as 7 or less out of 10. Most people, when they actually really are asked to do it, are quite good at it. I just think a lot of the times runners in particular aren't honest enough. And so they are rating themselves as 7, but they're closer to 8. And 8 is hard. I mean, you shouldn't
Are you
8
calling us all a bunch of liars, Lindsey? Is that what you're doing?
8 out of 10 is like 30 to 35 minutes of, and then you're going to start struggling to maintain that for any longer than that. So yeah, 7 or below is good. And then Brad, the good old talk test. There's very few things that beat that. If you can hold a robust conversation, you are running easy enough. So that's one that I like to use. Just go out, run with some friends, argue about whether it should have been a red card or not. When the Lions played the Aussies a while ago, argue about whether Liverpool or Man United are the best team in the history of the Premier League. I mean, we know who the best team is now, but that's why I said let's argue about in the history of the Premier League. So yeah, just that those are the kind of things that you want to be able to have a robust conversation. And if you can do that, then you are probably running easy enough.
Yeah, there is one test that is better than the talk test, and that's the sing test. That's obviously something we coined the phrase during COVID when we were running on our own because you couldn't talk to anyone. So if you could bust out in song and you could sing your favorite song, then you definitely are running easy enough on your easy days. So there's one test you can do, Lindsey, and then let's just touch on walk breaks because often people like one of the bits of pushback we get when we're telling people to run easy is that it just feels uncomfortable. I really struggle. And especially in runners 50, 60s and beyond, having these walk breaks, regular scheduled walk breaks really does sort of take the pressure off a bit from a heart rate perspective, but also it does help you. I mean, we're talking today the science of running fast at a lower heart rate, but it also allows you physically to run further by including these regular walk breaks, which then also plays into the lower heart rate gap.
No, absolutely. And I think, when you're starting out, very good place to do it. And that is, that is the cornerstone of Phil Maffetone's training philosophy is we're going to run at this heart rate. Let's just say whoever you are, that your number is 135. So when you go over 135, you walk. You walk until it's 10 beats under your target heart rate. So if your target heart rate is 135 and you get hit 136, 137, you walk until you get to 125 and then you start running again. And that teaches you, it actually does teach you to run just that little bit slower because you learn what the right intensity is. But what it does is it means that you never run too hard for too long before you then have your walk break. So that works for both controlling the heart rate and it works for controlling the eccentric load. And then the beauty of it, if you track it over time, is what you will see. It's every 2 to 3 weeks, there is this very subtle shift in your speed. And that over a period of 8 to 12 weeks, and it doesn't feel like anything's changed. So for a lot of people, it's frustrating because they go like, I'm just struggling. I'm not really getting faster. But you compare your 12 weeks running to your week 1 running, and you go, hang on, I'm 4 seconds, 5 seconds, 8 seconds. I mean, I sometimes see oaks running 13, 14 seconds a K faster, and they go, oh, but that's not that much. Well, it's huge because over 10 kilometers is 2.5 minutes. I mean, improving your 10K time by 2.5 minutes, that's massive. So yeah, that is the trick here, is that by adding those walk breaks and forcing yourself into that minimum effective dose, look over the long term. Have a look every 8 to 12 weeks, and you'll see that actually I have increased a little bit. And you know, Brad, again, we on this podcast we always have to come back to the fact, okay, but yes, what about 50 and 55-year-olds? You know, what about my dad who's 75 and we use him all the time? And he does through a cross country season, for example, he goes from running like mid sixes down to 605, 610. So there is, although his overall pattern is still getting slower, he still, through a training block, does still see some micro improvements.
Yeah, Lindsey, and that was where I wanted to go, was looking at sort of the long term picture, and how, as a runner over 50, you can stay patient with this process, because it can be super frustrating, because it feels like by slowing down you're forcing yourself to run slower, and it's just not going to get better. And how to track progress, meaningful progress over time. Like, what should you expect the results to be in the first 3 to 6 months, as an example? And you sort of touched on the seconds per K, but that, I think, is probably the crux of this matter. You don't want to be comparing daily runs to each other. You've got to almost zoom out to see the bigger picture and where you're going, and almost look back. And it's you yeah, and that's the difficult thing, is you have to trust the process enough to go, I'm zooming out, and I'm only going to actually compare in 3 months' time.
And you have to trust the data. And that's why I started at the beginning and said, like, we need reliable. We need to know that what we're comparing is comparable. You know, you're not just getting inconsistent rubbish readings. And it's also why it's a useful tool for every now and then, and perhaps doesn't need to be used all the time. But when we go through a period of struggling, of illness, of being injured, of having taken a break, it's just a really good way to get a slightly more objective feeling of where we are. And I think, you know, we get tons of short-term success when people turn this on, because that's the point. People have been doing it wrong. The unfortunate reality is that because of the hormonal changes that are happening inside you, because of the physical changes that are happening inside of you, when we fix these mistakes, there will be a short-term surge, and then we will go back to slowing down ever so slightly again. But we've had a number of guests now on the pod that all kind of say the same thing, is that the people that do these things consistently well become relatively better than their peers. So they also slow down, but they slow down less than their peers. So when they were in their 40s, they never dreamed of finishing on the podium. But in their 60s, they're finishing on the podium. And some of it's because there are less competitors around them. But in some cases, it's they're beating people they never beat before. And that's because they're just doing the things properly. And so their relative loss is better than the people around them.
Yeah, I think it was Grant Jenkins 2 weeks ago who spoke about that exact same thing with an athlete that he worked with that was like bang average early on. And then just as they've gotten older, they've just gotten not faster, but they've just gotten better relative to their peers, that they're almost like world-class level now, which is absolutely amazing. Linz, to sum this up, and let's get practical here, right? So if someone wants to start improving their pace at a lower heart rate, what is step one?
Yeah, so I wish it was that simple, Brad. I mean, it depends where you're starting. No, honestly, it depends where you're starting from. So if you are a rank beginner, or step one's the easy one, get an accurate heart rate measurement tool. Okay, step one, accurate heart measurement tool. Step two is a bit more complicated. How do we use that to individualize that heart rate response? So if you're a more experienced runner, you're going to go out, you're going to hit a 5K hard, and you're going to take your average heart rate for that 5K, and you're going to pretty much call that your threshold. So there's some nuances in there, but honestly, that'll be good enough. And then you're going to set your easy runs for between 75 and 85% of that number. Okay. And then you're going to do your easy runs there, and you're going to push yourself and not worry about your heart rate so much when you do your harder runs. Okay. If you're a beginner, you're going to use 190 minus age if you are over the age of 50. That's going to peg your upper limit on your heart rate, and you're going to walk every time you breach that number. And then in 6 to 8 weeks' time, you're going to do the 5K, and then you're going to set that as your threshold, and off you go.
Yeah, Lindsey, and I think it's important. Patience is key in this process because it can feel frustrating. But the truth of the matter is we're in this for the long haul. Like, we don't want to just run a 5K fast in 2 months or 3 months from now. We want to be running well and sort of in good shape physically for as long as humanly possible. So that's our number one goal. Yes, we talk about running fast to beyond 50. We want you to run for as long as you want to run and are physically able to run. And the way to do that is this. It's like patience. We're in the long game here. It's like that's what we're doing. So, Lindsey, as always, love chatting to you about these sorts of things. We look forward to catching up again next week.
Cool. Cheers, Brad.